The wind howled through the empty streets of Cimarron as Gabriel West stood motionless at the edge of town, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon where the setting sun painted the sky in violent shades of crimson and gold. The year was 1876, and the territory of New Mexico had become as much a part of him as the six-shooter holstered at his hip. He'd tracked outlaws across 3 states, brought men to justice that no one else could catch, but he'd never faced a disappearance like this one. "She's gone," they had cried. The townsfolk gathered in the dusty street, their voices a chorus of despair that echoed through the valley. Some wept openly, others stood stone-faced, but all bore the weight of Grace Foster's vanishing. Gabriel had simply tightened the bandana around his neck, adjusted his worn Stetson, and in a voice steady as bedrock declared, "Then she'll rise when I find her again." Those words had earned him confused glances, some muttering about the foolishness of hope. After all, when a woman disappeared in the territories, especially one as beloved as the schoolteacher, it rarely ended well. But Gabriel wasn't known for empty promises. In the 10 years he'd worn a badge, he'd never failed to find what he sought, whether it was stolen cattle, missing gold, or escaped prisoners. This was different, though. This was Grace. He'd first met her 6 months prior when she'd arrived on the eastbound stage, her simple blue dress and determined expression setting her apart from the usual travelers. While most newcomers to Cimarron arrived with dreams of gold or escape from troubled pasts, Grace Foster had come with books, a certificate from a teacher's college in Boston, and an unwavering conviction that education would tame the West faster than any gun. Gabriel mounted his chestnut gelding copper and clicked his tongue. The horse knew the trail ahead would be long, but like his rider, he was built for endurance. The fading sunlight caught the silver star pinned to Gabriel's vest, a symbol of authority that meant little where he was headed, into the vast, lawless expanse beyond civilization's reach. Sheriff Emmett Parker had tried to dissuade him. "You're chasing ghosts, Gabe," he'd said, his weathered face creased with concern. 3 days gone with no trail to follow, the Comancheros probably took her, or maybe it was Jenkins and his boys, either way she's. He'd trailed off, unwilling to speak the grim conclusion aloud. Gabriel had simply continued checking his supplies, ammunition, jerky, coffee, bedroll, methodical as always. "I know her, Emmett. She wouldn't leave willingly and she wouldn't go quietly. There's a trail. I just need to find it." The truth, which Gabriel kept to himself, was that Grace Foster had become more than just another citizen under his protection. Her laughter had a way of cutting through the constant vigilance of his profession. Her conviction that books could change a person had even led him to borrow a few, sitting up late by lamplight reading stories of faraway places and ideals that seemed impossible in the brutal reality of the frontier. Now, as Cimarron disappeared behind him, Gabriel reflected on the small moments that had drawn him to her, the way she stubbornly rang the school bell even when only 2 children showed up during harvest time, how she'd stood up to the saloon owner when his piano playing disrupted her lessons. The evening she'd spotted Gabriel watching the sunset from the jailhouse porch and simply joined him in silence, offering nothing but companionship. The desert night fell quickly, and Gabriel made camp in a sheltered arroyo. As he built a small fire, he withdrew a folded piece of paper from his breast pocket. It was a note discovered in Grace's boarding house room. The only clue to her disappearance, written in an elegant but unfamiliar hand. "The truth about Silver Canyon cannot remain buried. Your father knew this. Now you must as well." Gabriel had questioned everyone in town about Silver Canyon, only to receive shrugs or uneasy glances. No one seemed to know its significance or why it might be connected to Grace Foster, who had no family in the territories as far as anyone knew. Her father, reportedly a respected physician in Boston, had died years ago. He studied the note again by firelight before carefully folding and returning it to his pocket. Tomorrow he would ride to the nearest Apache settlement. If anyone knew the secrets of the land, it would be those who had inhabited it for generations. Sleep came fitfully that night, haunted by dreams of Grace's face, her hazel eyes wide with fear or perhaps determination. In the dream, she stood at the edge of a canyon, arms outstretched as if preparing to take flight, but whether to escape or embrace what lay below, Gabriel couldn't tell. Dawn broke with the distinctive stillness of the desert. Gabriel was already awake, brewing strong coffee and chewing on jerky as he plotted his route. The Apache settlement lay 2 days' ride to the southwest, but he knew of an old prospector, Hank Miller, who lived a day's journey ahead in a ramshackle cabin near what remained of the Spanish mission at San Miguel. If anyone had seen unusual activity in the area, it would be Hank, whose paranoia kept him constantly vigilant for claimed jumpers and government men. Gabriel rode hard that day, stopping only to rest copper and scan the terrain for signs of passage. By mid-afternoon, the heat had become oppressive, the sun a merciless overseer driving both man and beast to the limits of endurance. When he spotted a column of dust on the horizon, Gabriel guided Copper into the shelter of a rock formation, hand instinctively moving to his rifle. The riders, 3 men on tired horses, passed within 100 yards of his position. They were not Comancheros or Apache, but rough-looking white men with the distinctive bearing of those who lived outside the law. Gabriel memorized their appearance, noting particularly the distinctive albino horse ridden by the lead man, before continuing on his way once they were safely distant. He reached Hank's cabin as the light was failing, approaching cautiously. The old prospector was known to fire first and identify visitors later. But instead of Hank's customary warning shot, Gabriel was met with silence. The cabin door hung askew, its interior dark. "Hank," Gabriel called, Winchester ready as he dismounted and approached. "It's Gabriel West from Cimarron." Inside, the cabin showed signs of a struggle, overturned furniture, a broken lantern, scattered mining tools, but no Hank and, curiously, no blood. Gabriel methodically searched the small space, finding nothing until he noticed something unusual about the dirt floor near the stone fireplace. It had been recently disturbed. Using his knife, Gabriel excavated carefully until he uncovered a small tin box. Inside was a folded map, yellowed with age, and a letter addressed simply to the lawman. Gabriel's pulse quickened as he unfolded the letter and read, "By the last light of day, if you're reading this, I'm either dead or taken. They came asking about Silver Canyon again. Said they knew about the foster girl and that she'd gone looking. I told them nothing, but they didn't believe me. The map shows the way. Whatever's buried there, it's worth killing for." Hank Gabriel studied the crude map. Silver Canyon appeared to be located in a remote area to the west, in territory so desolate even the Apache rarely ventured there. He spent the night in Hank's cabin, door barricaded, sleeping in short intervals with his gun close at hand. Morning brought clarity and purpose. Gabriel left the cabin as he had found it, taking only the map and letter. He altered his course, abandoning his plan to visit the Apache settlement in favor of heading directly to Silver Canyon. Time was precious now. Both Hank and Grace had been taken because of whatever secret the canyon held. The journey became increasingly arduous as he left established trails behind. By the second day of this new route, the landscape had transformed into something alien and forbidding. Towers of red rock jutting from barren earth, deep ravines cutting across the land like ancient wounds, sparse vegetation clinging desperately to any patch of soil that might sustain it. On the third day, Gabriel spotted buzzards circling lazily in the distance. His stomach tightened. Following their grim signal, he discovered the body of a man face down in a dry creek bed. Approaching cautiously, rifle ready, Gabriel turned the corpse over. It wasn't Hank, nor anyone Gabriel recognized. The man wore the clothes of a miner or prospector, but his hands were too soft for such work. A bullet hole centered in his forehead told the story of his demise with brutal simplicity. Searching the body, Gabriel found nothing to identify him, but a small notebook in the inner pocket of his jacket contained a series of numbers and the initials SF Co. Silver Fist Company. Gabriel had heard rumors of this outfit, a mining operation with connections in California and beyond, known for aggressive expansion and questionable tactics in securing new claims. If they were involved, this was bigger than a missing schoolteacher. He gave the dead man what burial he could, marking the shallow grave with stones before continuing his journey. The map led him deeper into the maze of canyons, each turn revealing more daunting terrain. By nightfall, Gabriel estimated he was within a day's ride of Silver Canyon. That night, as he huddled near a small, sheltered fire, a voice suddenly emerged from the darkness. "You ride a long way from your town, lawman." Gabriel had his revolver drawn before the words were fully spoken, aiming at the source of the voice. From the shadows stepped a tall Apache man, his face weathered like the surrounding landscape, eyes reflecting the firelight with unsettling intensity. "I mean no harm," the man said in clear, if accented English. "I am called Thomas by the white missionaries, though my people name me Running Fox." Gabriel lowered his weapon slightly but remained wary. "What brings you out here alone, Thomas?" "The same as you, I think. I follow those who took the woman with hair like sunset." Gabriel's heart pounded. "You've seen Grace Foster when? Where?" Thomas moved closer, crouching across the fire from Gabriel. 3 days ago, men forced her west toward the canyon of Silver Water. She fought them. One man carries her mark on his face now." A hint of approval crossed his features. Hope surged through Gabriel for the first time since beginning this journey. "She's alive, then?" Thomas nodded solemnly. "Alive, but in danger. These men, they search for something hidden long ago, something my grandfather helped bury with the woman's father." Gabriel's mind raced to connect these new pieces. Grace's father was here, in the territories. She told everyone he was a doctor in Boston who died years ago. "He was both these things," Thomas replied enigmatically. "Doctor, yes. Dead, yes. But he came west before his death, carrying something that could not fall into wrong hands." Gabriel offered Thomas coffee and jerky, which the man accepted with a nod of thanks. As they ate, Thomas revealed what he knew. 20 years prior, a doctor named Joseph Foster had come to the territories, ostensibly to study native healing practices. He had befriended Thomas's grandfather, a respected medicine man, and together they had traveled extensively. "But the doctor carried a sickness in his heart," Thomas continued. "Not of the body, but of the spirit. He had seen something, discovered something that gave him no peace. Before he returned east, he and my grandfather journeyed to Silver Canyon. They buried what troubled him there beneath the watching stones. And now Grace has come looking for it," Gabriel said, pieces falling into place. "But why after all these years?" Thomas shrugged. "The woman received a letter. A man in black brought it to her school. After reading it, she asked many questions about Silver Canyon, about the old doctor from the east. The man in black, the riders Gabriel had seen, Silver Fist Company. The puzzle was taking shape, but too many pieces were still missing. "Will you help me find her?" Gabriel asked. Thomas studied him intently. "You wear the star of authority, but you seek this woman for reasons beyond your duty." Gabriel met his gaze steadily. "Yes." After a long moment, Thomas nodded. "Then we ride at dawn. The canyon is well hidden, and those who do not know the way often find only death." They set out as the first light broke over the eastern horizon. Thomas led them through passages Gabriel would have missed entirely, narrow gaps between towering rock faces, dry riverbeds that suddenly opened into hidden valleys, ancient trails marked only by the subtlest signs. By midday, they had entered a labyrinth of stone so complex that Gabriel lost all sense of direction. The sun appeared and disappeared behind the canyon walls as they wound their way deeper. Finally, Thomas halted at a precipice overlooking a narrow valley. Below, nestled against the far canyon wall, stood a cluster of crude wooden structures, the remains of an abandoned mining camp. Smoke rose from one of the buildings. 3 horses were hitched outside. "Silver Canyon," Thomas whispered, "and there are your enemies." Gabriel surveyed the scene through his field glasses. Movement caught his eye, a man emerging from the largest structure, rifle in hand. Even at this distance, Gabriel recognized him as one of the riders he had observed days earlier. "We need to get closer," Gabriel said, already planning his approach. "See if Grace is being held in one of those buildings." Thomas pointed to a narrow trail descending the canyon wall. "This path will take us down, but we must wait for darkness." In daylight, we would be seen before we reached the bottom. The hours until sunset stretched interminably. Gabriel watched the camp through his glasses, noting the movements of at least 3 different men. There was no sign of Grace, but the windows of the main building had been covered, preventing any view inside. As the shadows lengthened, Gabriel checked and rechecked his weapons. He had his Winchester rifle with 15 rounds, his Colt revolver with 6, and a hunting knife. Against 3 armed men, the odds weren't ideal, but he'd faced worse. Thomas disappeared briefly, returning with a small bundle of herbs which he crushed and mixed with a pinch of powder from a pouch at his waist. "For clear vision in darkness," he explained, dabbing the mixture below his eyes and offering the same to Gabriel, who hesitated only briefly before accepting. The bitter scent filled his nostrils, and within minutes, Gabriel found his night vision sharpening remarkably. The descent began as the last light faded from the sky. The trail was treacherous, narrow, steep, and littered with loose stones that could send them tumbling to their deaths with a single misstep. They moved with painful slowness, each foot carefully placed, each handhold tested. Halfway down, a stone dislodged under Gabriel's boot, clattering down the cliff face. Both men froze, pressing themselves against the rock wall as a guard below called out. "What was that?" "Johnson, check the north slope," footsteps approached, accompanied by the sound of a rifle being cocked. Gabriel and Thomas remained motionless, scarcely breathing. The guard moved directly below their position, lantern held high, peering up into the darkness. For an agonizing minute, the man stood there, then apparently satisfied, turned back toward the camp. "Probably just a mountain lion or some damn thing." They continued their descent with even greater caution, reaching the canyon floor an hour later. The camp was now less than 100 yards away, its buildings dark silhouettes against the star-filled sky. A single lantern burned in the largest structure, casting elongated shadows through the gaps in the wooden walls. Thomas pointed to a small shed set apart from the main buildings. "I will create a distraction there," he whispered. "When they investigate, you enter the large building." Before Gabriel could protest this dangerous plan, Thomas had melted into the darkness. Gabriel crept closer to the camp, using scattered boulders for cover until he was within 20 yards of the main building. He could now make out voices from inside, men arguing in hushed but intense tones. "Can't keep stalling, Blackwell. Either she tells us where it's buried or we start getting more persuasive. The boss wants her unharmed. She's no use if she's too broken to lead us to it. She's been unharmed for days now, and we've got nothing. The longer we stay here, the more likely someone comes looking. Someone already has." This was a new voice, female, strained but defiant, Grace. Gabriel's heart leaped at the sound. "Sheriff Parker won't just let a schoolteacher disappear." A harsh laugh followed. "Your sheriff thinks you ran off with a traveling salesman. We made sure of that." Gabriel's grip tightened on his rifle. These men had planned carefully, creating a false trail to throw off any search. But they hadn't counted on him. Suddenly, the night erupted with noise and light as the shed Thomas had targeted burst into flames. Shouts of alarm rang out, and 2 men ran from the main building toward the blaze. Weapons drawn, Gabriel seized the moment, moving swiftly to the building's entrance. The door was unlatched. He pushed it open with the barrel of his rifle and stepped inside, immediately pressing his back against the wall. In the lantern light, he saw Grace tied to a chair in the center of the room. Her dress was dirty and torn, her red hair disheveled, but her eyes blazed with the same determination he remembered. A tall man in a black coat stood beside her, revolver now pointed at Gabriel. "That's far enough, lawman," the man said, his voice the same one that had argued for getting more persuasive moments earlier. "Drop the rifle or she gets a bullet." Gabriel assessed the situation in an instant. The man, presumably Blackwell, stood too close to Grace for a clear shot. "Any attempt would risk hitting her instead," I said. "Drop it." Blackwell's hand was steady, his eyes cold. Gabriel slowly lowered his Winchester to the floor. Let her go, Blackwell. Whatever you're after, it's not worth hanging for. You're a long way from any gallows badge. Blackwell gestured with his gun. Hands up where I can see them. Gabriel complied, watching for any opening. Silver Fist Company sent you. What are you looking for that's worth kidnapping and murder? Blackwell's eyes narrowed. You're asking questions you don't want answers to. He knows, Gordon, Grace said suddenly. My father told me everything before he died, about the mine, the fever, what your company did to those workers. Gordon Blackwell, Gabriel now knew looked momentarily uncertain. Your father was a fool who couldn't mind his own business. Just like his daughter. Gabriel took a small step forward, drawing Blackwell's attention back to him. The dead man I found, one of yours? Harrison got careless, Blackwell replied with a shrug. Started talking about going to the authorities, getting a bigger cut, bad for business. Outside, shouts indicated the other men were still occupied with the fire. Gabriel needed to act before they returned. Whatever happened 20 years ago, it's over, Gabriel said, taking another small step. Let Grace go, ride out of here, and I won't come after you. Blackwell laughed. You still don't understand what's at stake. This isn't about some old mining accident. It's about the momentary distraction was all Gabriel needed. He lunged forward, knocking Blackwell's gun arm upward as it discharged, the bullet splintering the wooden ceiling. They crashed to the floor, Gabriel driving his fist into Blackwell's jaw, then grappling for control of the revolver. Blackwell was strong and fought with the desperation of a man who knew the price of failure. He managed to smash the gun butt against Gabriel's temple, sending a flash of pain and stars across his vision. Gabriel responded by driving his knee into Blackwell's midsection, forcing the air from his lungs. The revolver skittered across the floor as both men lost their grip. Blackwell scrambled after it, but Gabriel tackled him from behind, slamming his face into the rough wooden floorboards. Blood sprayed from Blackwell's broken nose. Gabriel seized a nearby chair and brought it down across Blackwell's back, splintering the furniture and dropping the man to the floor in a groaning heap. A swift kick ensured he wouldn't rise again soon. Breathing heavily, Gabriel turned to Grace, pulling his knife to cut her bonds. Are you hurt? She shook her head, rubbing circulation back into her wrists. Nothing serious. Gabriel, how did you find me? Everyone must think I'm gone, Gabriel finished, helping her to her feet. They do, but I knew you wouldn't leave without saying goodbye. The admission hung between them, more revealing than he'd intended. Grace's eyes softened, and she reached up to touch the bloody gash on his temple. You're injured. It's nothing. He retrieved his rifle and Blackwell's revolver. We need to move. His men will be back any minute. Not without this. Grace moved to a corner of the room where several saddlebags lay piled. She rifled through one, extracting a leather-bound journal. My father's records, the proof of what happened here. Gabriel heard footsteps approaching. Explain later, now we run. They slipped out the back of the building, just as the other men returned to find their leader unconscious. Shouts and curses followed them into the darkness as Gabriel led Grace toward the canyon wall where he and Thomas had descended. We can't climb that in the dark, Grace said, staring up at the imposing cliff. We don't have to. Thomas materialized beside them, seemingly from nowhere. There is another way. He guided them to a narrow fissure in the canyon wall, barely visible in the darkness. Inside, the passage widened enough for single-file travel. They pushed deeper into the earth as the sounds of pursuit grew behind them. The old ones carved these passages long before my people came to these lands, Thomas explained as they hurried through the dark corridor. They connect many parts of the canyon system. The tunnel twisted and branched, and Gabriel quickly lost all sense of direction. Only Thomas's confident lead prevented them from becoming hopelessly lost. After what seemed like hours of tense travel, punctuated by distant shouts from their pursuers, they emerged onto a small ledge high above the canyon floor. We will rest here, Thomas said. The passage continues, but we need light to follow it safely. As they caught their breath, Gabriel turned to Grace. What is this all about? What did your father find that's worth killing for? Grace clutched the journal tightly. Evidence. In 1856, Silver Fist Company operated a mine in this canyon. They discovered not just silver, but a vein of gold so rich it would have made them the wealthiest mining operation in the territories. But there was an outbreak of fever in the camp. Dozens of miners fell ill. That happens in mining camps, Gabriel said. Cramped conditions, poor sanitation. This was different, Grace continued. My father was brought in to treat the sick. He discovered the company had been using a new extraction method involving mercury compounds. The miners weren't just sick, they were being poisoned. When he reported his findings, the company officials thanked him, paid him handsomely, and said they would cease operations. Gabriel's brow furrowed, but they didn't? No. They moved the survivors, brought in new workers, mostly Chinese and Mexican laborers who couldn't speak English, and continued. When my father found out, he returned with a federal inspector. The night before the inspection, there was a tragic accident. A cave-in killed over 30 miners and the inspector. My father barely escaped with his life and the company's records, which proved not only their negligence but that they had deliberately caused the cave-in to hide the evidence. And he buried these records here, Gabriel asked, along with samples of the contaminated ore and soil. He hid them where the company couldn't find them, then returned east. He intended to bring a full federal investigation, but his health began failing delayed effects of his own exposure to the mercury. Before he died, he told me the truth and made me promise to ensure justice was done. Thomas spoke from the darkness. My grandfather helped hide these things. He said the earth itself was poisoned here, that it must remain untouched. So why come back now? Gabriel asked. Why not leave it buried? Grace opened the journal, tilting it to catch the faint starlight. 2 months ago, I received a letter from a former Silver Fist employee, a man named James Harrison. He was dying of the same conditions that killed the miners. His conscience troubled him. He wrote that the company was planning to reopen the mine, that they'd found investors for a major operation that would employ hundreds. Hundreds of new victims, Gabriel said grimly. Exactly. Harrison had discovered my father's connection to the original investigation. He begged me to find the evidence and expose the truth before more people died. I didn't tell anyone in Cimarron the real reason for my journey. I couldn't risk word getting back to Silver Fist, but somehow they found out anyway. Harrison, Gabriel realized, the dead man I found. He must have been followed when he sent you the letter. Dawn was beginning to lighten the sky, revealing their precarious position on the canyon wall. Below, they could see figures moving. Blackwell's men, still searching. We need to recover the evidence your father buried, Gabriel said, checking his ammunition. Then get back to civilization, where I can send telegrams to the federal marshal's office and the territorial governor. Thomas pointed to a towering formation across the canyon. The Watching Stones. That is where they buried the metal box. Gabriel studied the distance. We'll have to circle around, too exposed to cross the canyon floor directly. They followed Thomas through more hidden passages, emerging hours later on the opposite side of the canyon. The distinctive rock formation, 2 tall pillars with a third balanced across them like a lintel, stood sentinel over this section of the canyon. Beneath the arch, Thomas said, 10 paces east beneath the earth. Gabriel kept watch while Grace and Thomas dug. The soil was hard-packed, but eventually they struck something solid. A metal box, roughly the size of a small trunk, emerged from the earth. It was sealed with a heavy padlock, which Gabriel broke open with a rock. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, they found stacks of documents, company ledgers, medical records, official correspondence, along with several sealed glass jars containing soil and rock samples. Grace verified the contents against her father's journal. It's all here, she said, relief evident in her voice. Everything needed to prove what they did. Their triumph was short-lived. A rifle shot cracked the air, sending stone chips flying from the rock near Gabriel's head. He pushed Grace down, drawing his revolver as he scanned for the shooter. Behind the eastern boulder, Thomas said quietly, notching an arrow in a bow Gabriel hadn't noticed he carried. 2 more shots followed, pinning them behind the Watching Stones. Gabriel returned fire, forcing their attacker to duck for cover. "It's Blackwell," Grace said. "I recognize his hat." Gabriel nodded. "And where is he? His men won't be far behind. We need to move now." They gathered the evidence, securing it in a saddlebag Thomas had somehow acquired during the night. But as they prepared to retreat to the passage, 2 more gunmen appeared on the ridge above, cutting off their escape. "We're surrounded," Gabriel said grimly, counting his remaining ammunition. 4 rifle rounds, 3 in his revolver, not enough for a prolonged fight. Grace clutched his arm. "There's another way. My father's journal mentions a cave system beneath this part of the canyon, an underground river that emerges miles from here." Thomas nodded. "The water path. It is dangerous. Many have entered, few returned." "Better odds than facing 3 gunmen with superior position," Gabriel decided. "Where's the entrance?" Thomas led them to a depression behind the watching stones, partially hidden by brush and fallen rocks. As they cleared the debris, a dark opening appeared, cool air flowing from its depths. The sound of running water echoed from below. "You first," Gabriel told Grace, handing her the saddlebag with the evidence. "Thomas, go with her. I'll hold them off, then follow." "No," Grace protested. "We go together or not at all." A bullet ricocheting off the rocks emphasized the urgency of their situation. Gabriel saw the determination in Grace's eyes and knew argument would waste precious time. "Together, then," he agreed, but quickly. Thomas led the way into the darkness, followed by Grace. Gabriel fired several covering shots, then scrambled into the cave entrance, pulling brush and rocks down behind him to slow any pursuit. Inside, the passage descended steeply. They moved as quickly as they dared in the near-total darkness, guided only by the sound of rushing water growing louder ahead. The air grew damp and cold, their breaths visible in what little light filtered from above. The passage widened into a cavern with a swift underground river cutting across their path. The water looked black in the darkness, its surface broken by white-capped rapids. "We must follow the water," Thomas said. "It will lead us out. Can we wade it?" Gabriel asked, eyeing the churning current dubiously. Thomas shook his head. "Too deep, too strong, but there is a path along the edge." The path proved to be a narrow ledge, barely wide enough for single-file travel, slick with spray from the rapids. They moved slowly, pressed against the cavern wall, each step a test of nerve and balance. Behind them, shouts and the glow of lanterns indicated their pursuers had found the cave entrance. Gabriel urged Grace and Thomas forward, knowing their only chance was to reach the exit before Blackwell's men caught up. The ledge narrowed further, forcing them to sidle along with their backs to the wall. Grace slipped once, nearly falling into the churning water, saved only by Gabriel's quick reflexes as he caught her arm. "Thank you," she gasped, gripping his hand tightly as they continued. The path took them deeper into the earth, the roar of the water now so loud it made conversation impossible. The air grew thinner, colder. Just when Gabriel feared they had taken a wrong turn into an endless labyrinth, the cavern began to lighten. Ahead, daylight filtered through an opening where the underground river emerged into a sunlit canyon. Freedom beckoned just 100 yards away. But as they hurried forward, a section of the ledge crumbled beneath Thomas's feet. He fell with a shout, plunging into the raging current. Gabriel lunged for him, managing to catch his arm as the water pulled him away. For a desperate moment he held on, feeling his own footing begin to slip on the wet stone. Grace grabbed Gabriel's belt from behind, anchoring him. With their combined strength, they pulled Thomas from the water's grasp. He lay gasping on the narrow ledge, soaked and battered but alive. "The evidence," he coughed. "Is it safe?" Grace checked the saddlebag, which had remained dry across her chest. "Everything's intact." They helped Thomas to his feet, continuing more cautiously toward the exit. When they finally emerged into daylight, they found themselves in an unfamiliar canyon, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the sand and stone. "Where are we?" Grace asked, looking around at the barren landscape. Thomas oriented himself by the sun. 5, perhaps 6 miles from where we entered. A hard day's walk to the nearest settlement." Gabriel checked his weapons, now damp from the cave. The rifle might still function, but he couldn't count on it. The revolver seemed in better shape. 3 bullets remained. "We should keep moving," he said. "Blackwell won't give up easily, not with what's at stake." They followed the river downstream, moving as quickly as Thomas's condition allowed. The water had battered him against rocks during his brief submersion, leaving him bruised and limping. By nightfall, they had covered perhaps 3 miles, with no sign of pursuit, but also no sign of civilization. They made camp in a sheltered hollow, risking a small fire to dry their clothes and warm Thomas, who had begun shivering uncontrollably. Gabriel kept watch while Grace tended to the Apache's injuries, binding a sprained ankle with strips torn from her petticoat. As Thomas finally drifted into exhausted sleep, Grace joined Gabriel by the fire. The dancing flames illuminated her face, showing the scratches and dirt, but also the unwavering resolve that had drawn him to her from the beginning. "You could have died today," she said softly. "All of us could have, and for what? Some papers and soil samples? Justice," Gabriel replied simply. "For the men who died and those who would have died if Silver Fist reopened the mine." He paused, studying her face. "Why didn't you tell me what you were planning? I could have helped from the beginning," Grace sighed. "I wasn't sure who to trust. Silver Fist has connections everywhere: politicians, lawmen, judges. My father learned that the hard way." She looked up at him. "But I should have trusted you. I'm sorry." Gabriel reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "When they told me you were gone, I felt like something had been torn from me, something I hadn't even realized was there until it was missing." In the firelight, he saw tears well in her eyes. "I never meant to cause you pain." "You didn't," he said. "You gave me purpose, a reason beyond duty." His hand found hers in the darkness. "I meant what I said when they told me you were gone, that you would rise again when I found you, because I would have searched forever if that's what it took." Grace moved closer, her head coming to rest against his shoulder. "My father always said that truth rises, no matter how deeply it's buried. I think people are the same way." They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned low, the weight of the day's events settling around them. Gabriel found himself imagining a future beyond this mission, one where Grace continued teaching in Cimarron, where he might find the courage to call on her properly, where they might build something together in the harsh but beautiful land they both had come to love. Dawn brought renewed determination and the discovery that Thomas's ankle had improved enough for travel. They set out early, following the river's course through the winding canyon. By midday, they spotted smoke on the horizon, a settlement or perhaps a ranch. Their relief was premature. As they approached the final bend before the canyon opened into the plains, the crack of a rifle shot echoed off the stone walls. A bullet kicked up dirt at Gabriel's feet. "Take cover," he shouted, pulling Grace behind a boulder as Thomas dove for shelter on the opposite side of the path. Gordon Blackwell's voice called out from a position above them. "That's far enough, West. Throw out the saddlebag and the journal, and I might let you live." Gabriel peered around the boulder, trying to locate their attackers. He spotted movement on a ridge about 50 yards ahead: Blackwell and at least one other man, both armed with rifles. "How did they get ahead of us?" Grace whispered. "Must have known about another exit from the cave system," Gabriel replied grimly. "Or maybe they have horses waiting nearby and circled around while we were on foot." Thomas signaled from his position, pointing to a narrow ravine that branched off to their right, a possible escape route. Gabriel nodded his understanding. "Blackwell," he called, "it's over. Even if you kill us, people know what you've done. The territorial governor is expecting my report." A mocking laugh echoed back. "Nice try, lawman, but we both know you rode out of Cimarron without telling a soul where you were headed." He was right, Gabriel realized. In his haste to find Grace, he'd left no instructions, no letter explaining his suspicions. If they died here, the truth might stay buried for years more. "Give me the evidence," Blackwell continued. "You get to walk away, the schoolteacher too. That's a fair offer." Grace clutched the saddlebag tighter. "He's lying," she whispered. "He can't let us live, not now." Gabriel nodded, then leaned close to her. "When I start shooting, run for that ravine. Thomas will cover you. I'll be right behind." Gabriel, no, trust me, he said, meeting her eyes. I found you once. I'll find you again. Before she could protest further, Gabriel fired his remaining rifle rounds in quick succession, forcing Blackwell and his man to duck for cover. Thomas immediately loosed several arrows toward the ridge, the projectiles arcing gracefully before clattering among the rocks where their enemies hid. Grace hesitated only a moment before sprinting for the ravine, the precious saddlebag clutched to her chest. Thomas provided covering fire with more arrows as Gabriel emptied his revolver toward the ridge. Once Grace reached the relative safety of the ravine, Gabriel prepared to follow. But as he rose from cover, a sharp pain exploded in his left shoulder, spinning him back against the boulder. Warm blood flowed down his arm. Gabriel, Grace's anguished cry carried across the canyon. He pressed himself back into cover, gritting his teeth against the pain. The bullet had passed through muscle, missing bone and vital organs, but the wound was bleeding freely. He tore a strip from his bandana, binding it as best he could one-handed. Go, he shouted to Grace. Get to safety. Instead, he saw her emerge from the ravine, running back toward him despite Thomas's attempts to stop her. Fool woman, Gabriel muttered, even as his heart swelled at her courage. Blackwell saw her too. Stop right there, Miss Foster, he called, or the next bullet goes through your heart. Grace froze in the open, caught between the ravine and Gabriel's position. Thomas had an arrow knocked, but Blackwell and his man had clear shots at Grace from their elevated position. Time seemed to slow as Gabriel assessed their desperate situation. He was wounded out of ammunition. Grace was exposed. Thomas had only a few arrows remaining. And Blackwell held all the advantages. Then, from somewhere beyond the canyon, came the distant sound of hoofbeats. Many horses moving fast, all heads turned toward the sound. Riders coming, Blackwell's companion shouted. At least 6, maybe more, Blackwell cursed. Is it the law? Can't tell yet. The momentary distraction was all Thomas needed. He loosed an arrow that found its mark in the shoulder of Blackwell's companion, who screamed and dropped his rifle. It clattered down the rocky slope. Gabriel seized the opportunity, charging from cover toward Grace despite the fire in his wounded shoulder. He reached her just as Blackwell recovered, raising his rifle. Down, Gabriel tackled Grace to the ground as a bullet whined overhead. They rolled together behind a fallen boulder, Gabriel using his body to shield her. The hoofbeats grew louder, resolving into a thunder of approaching horses. From around the bend came a party of riders, not lawmen, but Apache warriors, a dozen strong, led by an older man whose bearing marked him as a chief. Thomas called out in his native language. The chief responded, raising his hand. The warriors fanned out, surrounding the canyon in a coordinated movement that spoke of long practice. Blackwell, seeing himself outnumbered, disappeared from the ridge. Moments later, they heard the sound of a horse galloping away. The chief dismounted, approaching Thomas with dignity. They conversed briefly in Apache before the older man turned to Gabriel and Grace. My father says you have shown great courage, Thomas translated. He has been watching Silver Canyon since the poison was buried there. When he learned from a hunter that white men had returned, he gathered warriors to investigate. Tell him we're grateful for the rescue, Gabriel said, wincing as he tried to stand. The blood loss was making him lightheaded. The chief spoke again, gesturing toward Gabriel's wound. Thomas nodded. He says our medicine woman will tend your injury at our camp. It is not far. As 2 warriors helped Gabriel onto a horse, Grace retrieved the saddlebag with the evidence. What about Blackwell? He's getting away. Thomas smiled slightly. The canyon has only 2 exits. My father's men guard both. True to Thomas's word, when they reached the Apache camp 2 hours later, they found Gordon Blackwell bound and under guard. The mining executive's once fine clothes were torn and dirty, his face bruised, his expression one of sullen defeat. The Apache medicine woman, an elderly woman with hands as gentle as they were skilled, cleaned and bound Gabriel's wound, applying a poultice of herbs that numbed the pain. As she worked, Grace sat beside him, holding his hand. I thought I'd lost you, she said softly, when I saw you fall. Gabriel squeezed her hand. I made you a promise. I intend to keep it. The next morning, rested and with Gabriel's wound properly treated, they prepared to leave. The chief had assigned 4 warriors to escort them safely to the nearest town with a telegraph office. From there, they could summon the territorial marshal and ensure the evidence reached the proper authorities. Blackwell would travel with them, bound and under guard. Justice awaited him in Santa Fe, where the territorial court could address his crimes both past and present. Before departing, Thomas approached them one last time. "My father asks what will become of Silver Canyon now." Grace opened her father's journal, showing the chief a passage she had translated. "My father wrote that the land should remain undisturbed for at least 50 years to allow the poison to fade. After that, perhaps it can heal." The chief nodded solemnly when Thomas translated. He spoke at length, gesturing to the surrounding landscape. "He says his people will watch over the canyon," Thomas interpreted. "As they have always done, no one will disturb its rest while they stand guard." Gabriel and Grace rode double on a horse provided by the Apache, the evidence secure in saddlebags, Blackwell following under guard. The journey to the nearest settlement, a small trading post called Cooper's Station, took 2 days of steady riding. From there, events moved swiftly. Telegrams were sent to the territorial governor and federal marshal's office. Within days, officials arrived to take custody of both Blackwell and the evidence. Grace provided testimony about her father's discoveries and the company's subsequent cover-up. The territorial newspapers, always hungry for scandal, spread the story far and wide. Silver Fist Company's stock collapsed as investors fled. Federal indictments were issued for company executives. The planned reopening of the mine was permanently abandoned. Through it all, Gabriel remained at Grace's side, his wound healing slowly but steadily. When the officials had departed with Blackwell and the formal statements had been given, they found themselves alone at last, sitting on the porch of the trading post as the sun set over the distant mountains. "What happens now?" Grace asked, watching the colors paint the sky. "Will you go back to being sheriff west of Cimarron?" Gabriel considered the question. "The badge has been my life for 10 years, but these past weeks..." He turned to face her. "I've discovered there are things more important than duty." Grace's eyes reflected the sunset's glow as she met his gaze. Such as a schoolteacher who believes books can tame the West. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, a woman willing to risk everything for justice. "Someone worth finding, no matter how far I had to search. Gabriel." His name was a whisper on her lips, full of questions and possibilities. "I don't know what the future holds," he continued, "but I know I want to face it with you if you'll have me." Her answer was not in words but in the way she leaned forward, her lips meeting his in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise. When they finally parted, she rested her forehead against his. "I think," she said softly, "that the students of Cimarron might benefit from having their sheriff attend reading lessons now and then." Gabriel laughed, pulling her close. "I'd like that very much, Miss Foster." 1 month later, Cimarron's schoolhouse bell rang out across the town, calling students to their lessons. Inside, Grace Foster stood at the blackboard, her red hair neatly pinned, her dress freshly pressed. The children sat in orderly rows, primers open on their desks. And at the back of the room, Gabriel West sat on a bench too small for his frame, hat resting on his knee, a primer of his own open before him. The badge still gleamed on his vest, but it no longer defined him completely. As Grace began the day's lesson, her eyes met his briefly, a smile passing between them that spoke of shared secrets and future promises. Outside, the wild territory stretched to the horizon, still untamed and full of dangers. But within the schoolhouse walls, a different kind of frontier was being conquered, one of knowledge and understanding. And in the hearts of the schoolteacher and the lawman, love had taken root, as resilient as the land itself. That evening, as they walked together along the town's main street, Gabriel presented Grace with a small wooden box. Inside lay a simple silver ring. "It's not much," he said apologetically, "but it comes with a promise that I will always find you no matter how far you go." Grace slipped the ring onto her finger, then reached up to touch his face. "I'm not going anywhere, Sheriff West. I've found exactly where I belong." Their wedding the following spring was the social event of the season in Cimarron. Thomas came from the Apache lands, bringing blessings from his father. Sheriff Emmett Parker stood as Gabriel's best man. Even the territorial governor attended, his presence a testament to the impact of what newspapers now called the Silver Canyon Affair. As years passed, the schoolhouse expanded, with Grace eventually becoming headmistress of Cimarron's first proper academy. Gabriel continued as sheriff until the territory achieved statehood, then accepted appointment as a federal marshal, his jurisdiction covering much of the new state of New Mexico. Their home, a comfortable adobe structure on the outskirts of town, filled with books, memories, and eventually, the laughter of children, 2 daughters and a son who grew up knowing both their father's sense of justice and their mother's love of learning. On the 20th anniversary of their meeting, Gabriel took Grace back to Silver Canyon. The Apache still guarded its secrets, but allowed them to visit out of respect for the role they had played in preserving the land. Standing beneath the watching stones, Grace opened her father's journal one last time. "He would be proud," she said, "to know the truth finally rose." Gabriel, gray now threading his dark hair, drew her close. "Just as I promised, you were gone, but you rose when I found you again." Together, they watched the sunset paint the canyon in shades of gold and crimson. The same colors that had filled the sky when a determined lawman had ridden out in search of a missing schoolteacher all those years ago, beginning a journey that had changed not only their lives, but the very landscape they now surveyed. As darkness fell, they turned toward home, toward the future they had built together in a land as wild and enduring as their love.